As Illinois approaches its bicentennial celebration, the Illinois Channel takes a look at the people, events, and landmarks that make up Illinois' rich history. Next, from Washington, D.C., we attend a symposium at the National Press Club titled Bicentennial Reflections, Insider Stories on Illinois Leaders and Legacies in Washington. This event, hosted by the Illinois State Society, features Clarence Page, a columnist and editorial writer with the Chicago Tribune, and Lynn, a columnist with the Chicago Sun-Times, commenting on the more influential Illinois politicians in the recent past, present, and future. This runs about 1 hour.
We're so glad to have such a wonderful turnout for this special program that we have, sponsored by the Illinois State Society, to begin and kick off the Illinois State Society's bicentennial celebrations of 200 years of Illinois statehood. You know, we want to give a special welcome to everyone who's in attendance, to all those who are viewing this event. We have a special program to highlight the political contributions, the contributions of Illinois political leaders here in Washington and their legacies. We have a distinguished panel, folks that we've gotten to know over the years, who we watch on television, who we listen to on the radio, who we read on a daily basis. We're very pleased that Lynn with the Chicago Sun-Times, Clarence Page with the Chicago Tribune, are serving as our panelists, and our moderator tonight is Ellen Shearer, who is Dean of the Medill School of Journalism and also serves as the Washington Bureau Chief for Medill News Service, affiliated with Northwestern University. You know, as the Illinois State Society, we can take so much pride in the fact that the Illinois State Society is the oldest state society in the history of Washington, D.C., and over our 163 years, we've enjoyed the participation of so many distinguished historical figures such as Abraham Lincoln and Everett Dirksen and Barack Obama. We've celebrated the fact that we've had 4 presidents from Illinois, 2 vice presidents, and 3 speakers of the House. So much that we celebrate. We have 1,000 members. We celebrate a lot of activities. We get together on a regular basis. We share our own personal experiences coming from Illinois or our ties to Illinois, but we also celebrate the history, the culture, and the cheer on our sports teams, too, from Illinois. We particularly want to thank our partners for this special event, Molina Healthcare, Medill School of Journalism, Southern Illinois University, the Illinois Channel, C-SPAN, and also the Illinois State Foundation, for their contribution and partnership in supporting this special event. As a native of Dwight, Illinois, it's my privilege this year to be president of the Illinois State Society, and it's an honor for me to have that. Let's give a warm welcome to our panelists and our hosts, and let's begin our program. Ellen.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm very excited to be hearing from 2 Illinois treasures this evening, Lynn Sweet and Clarence Page, and we'll be talking about politics, possibly policy, certainly maybe a little Illinois trivia thrown in, but tonight is everything Illinois. Starting with our panelists. So let me introduce you first to Clarence Page. Let me tell you a little bit about him. As you know, he is a columnist for the Chicago Tribune, and his column is nationally syndicated. He's also a member of the Tribune's editorial board. He has been with the Tribune. He first joined the Tribune right out of college and has always come back to the Tribune. He did leave the Tribune for a stint in the Army. I felt safer knowing that Clarence was protecting the Western United States from all enemies.
I'm glad somebody did.
From the press office. He also left the Tribune briefly, 4 years, to be at WBBM television, but came back to the Tribune. He has won a Pulitzer Prize in 1989 for commentary, and in 1972 for a series on voter fraud. He also has written several books, Showing My Color, Impolite Essays on Race and Identity, and A Bridge to the New Media Century. You've seen him on television, you've seen him at the, well, maybe you haven't seen him at the Gridiron, but he is a longtime member of the Gridiron and a terrific singer. And I just feel really lucky to get to talk politics with him tonight. And I feel the same way about Lynn, who is the Washington Bureau Chief of the Chicago Sun-Times. She's covered politics and government in Chicago for years, and then moved here to Washington in 1993. She's was named a fellow at Harvard University's Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School in 2004. She currently is president of the Gridiron here in Washington, an active and longtime member of Journalism and Women's Symposium, and a past president of the Washington Press Club Foundation. I should also note that she's in the Chicago Journalism Hall of Fame and the Medill Hall of Achievement as a Medill alum. So enough about these two guys. Now let's get them to talk politics. Before we get into the storied history of Illinois politics, let's talk about today. We have an Illinois member who resigned. Maybe not a complete surprise, but somewhat surprising. Clarence, what's your take?
Well, I mentioned to you before the program, I can't wait to talk to Luis Gutierrez to get an idea of why he decided to leave. Now, I find it to be rather poignant. I've known him a long time, and he's been an activist for years and years. He made himself a leading figure in the immigration debate nationwide.
Right.
And there's people throughout the immigration activism community who are singing the blues tonight over his departure. And I can't help but wonder what the current dominance of Republicans in Congress and the White House may have to do with his decision. I still view Luis as a young man who could stick around to perhaps wait for another administration to come in, and maybe people will be more friendly toward comprehensive immigration reform, and he could get a new stature that way. But for now, I don't know what plans he's got. He did say that he's leaving the Congress, but he's not planning to retire,
Right.
which doesn't surprise me because
Right.
he's got too much energy for that. And also the fact that Chuy Garcia, who was a longtime activist in Chicago, also a former mayoral candidate, is running for his seat, and apparently this is like Luis passing it on, so to speak.
Right.
Both of them were very key in the Harold Washington campaign back in the 80s when he was reaching out to the Hispanic community and all. I wish him well. Can't wait to get the rest of the story.
Yes, yes. Lynn?
I covered Luis from the beginning when he won his aldermanic seat when Harold Washington was mayor, giving Mayor Washington the control of City Council, 26th Ward race, and I've been following him up until last night. Now, I wrote a story years ago when he told me he was going to retire, and then he decided not to, and then all the rumors went flying last night, and now I guess it's true. So when he leaves Congress in January of 2019, it will mark 25 years. He's 60-something. He has a great pension. He will have a second and third act in him. I, too, want to know why he didn't signal this beforehand and what was going on with the filing of the petitions. So it's rare that he doesn't stage manage stuff better. He is a pretty master of that. But like Clarence, I want to see if there is a story behind the story, because it is rare that everyone is really surprised in Chicago politics. But Luis did the perfect head fake. He filed his nominating petitions.
It certainly caught a lot of people by surprise, I think. There's been some suggestion that he really wants to go and help Puerto Rico. Do you think that really could be the real reason, and it's that simple?
I think he's a grandfather. The next 2 years aren't going to be fun for his main. He could do what he's doing on immigration reform in or out of Congress. He will be a force one way or the other, and he knows his way around. So He has a home in Puerto Rico. He spent years there. I'm not ruling out that maybe he moves there and runs for, for governor there or something, but I think he has a lot of other options too, including private sector. He's very good on TV. I wouldn't be surprised if he has ends up with some TV show out of this. See, after 25 years, there's other things you could finally do. 25 years plus in Congress, plus the years in city council, and he also does real estate. So maybe he has a deal somewhere.
How about running for mayor?
I think he ruled by making the deal with Chewy, who ran against Rahm Emanuel last time. I would think even for Chicago, where everyone likes to move the chess pieces around, if he wanted to run for mayor, you're suggesting then that this was part of a deal to trade jobs? I don't know. I don't know. I don't think at this point that is what Luis would want for his next act, especially since he does want to spend so much time
Just in case
Puerto Rico.
I
everybody in the audience doesn't know who Chewy is. Do you want to just...
I'm so sorry.
Just say it.
Chewy Garcia is a Cook County board member who ran for mayor against Rahm Emanuel last time around. And he remains a popular figure in Illinois. He comes out of the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and his real name is Jesus, by the way.
Yes.
Which us old-timers forget sometimes. But
Right.
But no, I agree with you as far as the mayoral office or mayoral campaign goes. I just wanted to test you to see if you had a scoop you were sitting on that I didn't know about. But it's a...
You'll never tell, right?
No, we'll never tell. I tend to wonder about that possibility, but or just what he's going to do. One thing about Jesus, when he ran for mayor, that I found striking was a very smart man, not a great stimulating speaker. And that hurt him to some degree. I remember on the night of his acceptance speech, I was telling Ellen earlier, on the night of his acceptance of the nomination, the crowd could not have been more excited. And he got up to the podium and gave his speech. And the longer he spoke, the quieter the crowd got. Which reminded me of the old line about he gave a fireside chat and the fire went out. I really saw it happen that night. And I said, oh, he's going to be in trouble. And indeed, Rahm's not the most gifted orator in the world, but he's passionate. And he said, I'm going to campaign in every precinct, every L stop, blah, blah, blah. And he did. He worked hard for it and pulled off in a stunning landslide, I think, for the city. You have to go back a long way to get a landslide like that for our first election and without a machine behind it, so to speak. We'll see.
So today's headlines, ripped from today's headlines, Illinois in the news. Rahm Emanuel is a good example, though, of Illinois has been in the news for a long time in terms of political leaders. I'm going to briefly remind you of things I'm sure you remember, but Illinois is home to 3 presidents who were living in the state when they were elected, Lincoln, Grant, and of course, President Obama. Ronald Reagan was born in Illinois. Congressional leaders, where to stop? From Rahm Emanuel to Dick Durbin to Tammy Duckworth to Bob Michael, Dennis Hastert, Dirksen, Cannon, I'm sure I'm forgetting people, the Stevensons, Adlai running for president, the Dailies, LaHood. The list goes on and on, of course. In fact, the Medill School of Journalism is named after former Chicago Mayor Joseph Medill. So the list really does go on and on. You guys know a lot more about Illinois than I do. I'm from Wisconsin. Sorry. And you've also been, just enmeshed in Illinois politics for a long time. So I'm going to ask you, Clarence, who is your most memorable or fascinating Illinois politician to cover?
To cover.
I
was going to say Joe Medill, but you said to cover. I'm not quite that old, but Medill's one guy we both work for.
Yeah.
But just among those I've covered, well, of course, Barack Obama is easy, but I first met him when he was a state legislator, and his political advisor, David Axelrod, who was a former intern of mine at the Tribune back in the 70s, as I point out to anybody who doesn't know the news in Washington. I tried to tell everybody. But to see his campaign rise, it was fascinating to watch the parallels with Harold Washington's campaign. I won't go into all of the history of both, but it was intriguing to me because we're talking about an African-American political pioneer at a certain time in history when things came together. There was no guarantees of anything, but to watch it all build up from the bottom, Chicago, Illinois, and the rest of the country was infinitely fascinating. And I think he has left a mark on the office that we won't really be able to fully measure for a while yet. But I note the durability of the ACA, Obamacare, is fascinating to me because he was dedicated to that idea, and so was the Democratic Party in a lot of ways, but he made it happen. We've been trying to get, somebody's been trying to get national health care since Teddy Roosevelt, and he finally made it happen. And it caught the Republicans off guard in terms of when they were suddenly thrust into power over both Congress and the White House. They didn't have the preparation they didn't have their ducks in the row to fulfill their promise of repealing and replacing Obamacare, which shows you just how far apart the parties are now ideologically and in their orientation. Right. I expect the Republicans to be much more successful at cutting taxes. As my friend Tucker Carlson says, what's the joy of being a Republican if you can't cut taxes? So the very fact that they're even having divisions over tax cutting shows you something about the nature of our current political landscape. And so I think in a lot of ways, Obama was a pioneer and a trendsetter.
Yeah. Lynn?
Well, certainly covering the rise of Barack Obama was an incredible historic and reportorial experience. But I bring up someone else then who was just very interesting to cover, and that was Dan Rostenkowski.
Oh, yeah.
He was the House Ways and Means Committee chair when I came here at the end of September, or the beginning of September in 1993. And I didn't really know I knew no one. I came in, I'm new in town, covered politics in Chicago, so I kind of knew him. I just had a flashback. I covered from the Chicago on one of his reelection campaigns, and I went to a coffee at a home in a neighborhood called Lincoln Park in Chicago, all these well-heeled people, and all they wanted to know from him, if in whatever, I think they were doing the 86 tax law then, last time we did a big tax bill, and all people wanted to know from this great power, the ear of the president, the drinking buddy of everybody, are we going to keep the passive tax credit in the bill? Yeah. But he was a storyteller. He wasn't afraid to give an opinion. He was candid, he was insightful, and he was a player. Now, the story sometimes, if you're on deadline, went on, and you could never cut him off. You couldn't do that. Now, I know how he ended. We know how the story ended, but the time when I came and covered him in the early 90s was before he got in trouble. And let me just put another kind of point here. In my time in Washington, I have seen the rise and the fall of
This could be a long list.
Well, it's a list, okay? So you all know who I'm going to mention, right? Dan Rostenkowski, Rod Blagojevich, Jesse Jackson Jr., and Aaron Schock. All people that had great promise, and really Rostenkowski is an enduring figure politically because by the time he got into trouble, he already had a lot of his legacy established. But what is interesting is that he could make a deal happen because he had relationships. You've read about this for years, how it used to be. So I came in at the very tail end of how it used to be. You know, Bob Michael was in the House, and because they thought the end result was supposed to be a deal, they would make compromise, do some horse trading. They also had earmarks, which was the great lubricant. But anyway, so I kind of got a little bit of a ringside seat in a way, actually, that Barack Obama did not offer. He was very reserved, very cool, very played it close. So I think as a newcomer in Washington, covering Rosti was something that provided good stories, insight, had a local angle with a figure who was still a towering national figure.
And he loved to teach and preach.
Yes. Oh my gosh, one time I was at some restaurant and he was telling a story. And some reporter, and maybe it's a story that everyone had heard 3 times, but it didn't matter. Every time he told it, it sounded wonderful and fresh. And this reporter cut him off, said, yeah, we heard this. And the look he gave, and he said something, don't you ever cut me off. And he might have used a stronger word in the middle of a story.
When I was growing up, I thought that the word powerful was part of the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee's title.
Yeah.
Because that's what the newscasters always said. No, chairman of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee. When I met Dan Rostenkowski, I realized what it is part of the title, because he really had the power and knew how to wield it. And so to Bob Michael in a different way, from a minority point of view.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Well,
I don't want to take over.
But that's an interesting point. I mean, I certainly think, was President Obama is who he is he a reserved, cool person just by nature? But, that idea saying, I think you said Rostenkowski had opinions and would express them. And today, there's a lot more guardedness in most offices, not necessarily all offices.
Right.
But I just wonder if that has to do a little bit with there is just less kind of camaraderie, and so knowing every word will be used against you. There's my pop opinion.
Isn't this a famous story? And I'm sure some of you know this. Rostenkowski, and wasn't it Bob Michael, would drive back to Illinois together?
Right. That's right.
Which there were airplanes back then, but they
They enjoyed it.
They
enjoyed
made
it.
road trips all the time, and that you get work done. The other thing is, I think it's very hard to compare Obama and Rostenkowski because Obama was only in Congress 2 years. Of half that time he was running for president, and the half of the other time he was writing another book. So he never really did any legislative work in the way that a committee chairman would do it year in and year out for a very long time.
Well, people talk a lot about how Obama didn't like politics, which was remarkable for a guy who was as successful at it as he was. But look at the Democratic Party now. He didn't engage in party building either during his 8 years in office, and a lot of folks in the party resent that now. But I think it's just in his nature. He just was not into that. I mean, I never saw him so happy as when he was out there surfing after he was out of office. Right?
Well, it's interesting. We're talking now 25 years after the death of Harold Washington. 25, 30. No, it's more. 30.
It's
Hold on,
30
it's this
now,
week.
yeah. It was 77.
30 this week.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're kicking off the bicentennial for Illinois. And some of these themes kind of, I think as we talk, it's not a real long time when you think of the span of some of the, people in the Rostenkowskis, just one generation removed from other historic figures here in the story of Illinois in the Capitol.
Well, we've talked about some of the people you've covered. How about, and maybe this is the same person, but what have been some of the big impacts that you feel Illinois lawmakers have made? Or is there one towering figure, Cannon, or, what have been the big contributions from the Illinois delegation?
Well, for me, Everett Dirksen was an early influence. I'm old enough, I remember, by the way, when a lot of black folks were Republican. It's hard for young people to believe now. But indeed, the party of Lincoln was a real thing. And when I was growing up in the 50s, I remember when, I think it was the Little Rock Nine that really gave me a political consciousness. I was about 10 or 11 years old at the time. And I remember Arkansas National Guard keeping the black students out of Central High School one day on television, on our black and white TV there at home. The next day I turn on the tube and there is the airborne escorting black students into the high school. I turn to my parents and I said, what happened? And my dad says, President Eisenhower. And I thought at that point, President Eisenhower was the job title. And I said, well, who'll be the next President Eisenhower when this one's gone? But that's just how large Eisenhower was in my consciousness and a lot of other people at the time. Dirksen was the same way. I was like starting high school when the civil rights bill debate was going on there in '64. And I remember Everett Dirksen and Charlie Halleck was on the Democratic side. They called it the Ev and Charlie show. Some folks may remember this. But that's why you invite an old guy like me to take you back in time. I never forget, Dirksen was such a towering figure, really broadcast leadership and authority and confidence. And I never forget David Brinkley described his voice as akin to a chorus of corduroy pants, which any of you go, it's got to be on YouTube. Everything's on YouTube. If you haven't heard Dirksen, tune in and listen to him. He was a magnificent guy. But watching that debate take place at home, the Southern Democrats were keeping the Civil Rights Bill from getting debated and passed, and it was Dirksen led the Republicans, Northern Republicans, land of Lincoln, in that spirit to get the bill passed. So years later, I was working with Sissy Baker, Everett Dirksen's granddaughter, right, who was in charge of our Tribune broadcasting here in Washington for a while, and I went over to her and personally I said, I want to personally thank you on behalf of your grandfather. And she said, it's happened before. I'm sure it has. But no, he was like kind of a giant. I think about people like that when I look at Congress today, and I like a lot of people. I like Paul Ryan, and I find a lot to like about Mitch McConnell, believe it or not. But I don't see the leadership happening in Congress today. At the same time, and you alluded to this earlier, we're in a different atmosphere today where party organization isn't what it used to be. A House and Senate organization and leadership isn't what it used to be. The dynamics are very different. So right. I don't know when that's going to change, but they're still working on it. I'm still waiting for Congress to produce something this year. If we get through the whole year without them producing any major legislation, that'll be a history in itself. Your turn.
So we want another towering figure, but I think let's look at how we measure towering figures, and I think if we go no further than Capitol Hill, and if you look at the jury of their peers, the fact that a House building is named after a cannon and a Senate office building is named after Dirksen, when you think of all the people that have served in the House and Senate since the beginning of this nation, and 2 out of those 6 buildings are named for Illinois, and I think tells you how history of the Congress, how the people who served under the dome thought of these 2 figures that were towering in their time came. But I just also wanted to share a little sense I had of how long I have been involved in covering this, and my first kind of glimpse of how Illinois history was brought home. So one of the things that we've alluded to tonight, and one of the famous political families in Illinois, is the Adlai Stevenson family. Of course, Adlai I was the 23rd Vice President of the United States under Grover Cleveland, and then his son, he was the grandfather of Adlai II, who ran for president in 1952 and 1956. So now I'm a young reporter in my Medill, Washington quarter, working for the Alton Telegraph in the Carbondale, Southern Illinois. And so the senator at the time was Adlai III, who served between 1970 and 1981. So I walk into his office, and it looked to me like a room out of the Chicago Historical Society, because there were pictures of Adlai Stevenson, there were buttons, elect Adlai, and then I realized he just wasn't a collector of political paraphernalia. This was his family. It was kind of the same way when I was once invited to Ethel Kennedy's home for some event with one of her children, and I thought, I walk in there and I know everybody on the wall. So I think that kind of deep sense of an Illinois history that existed before me and was playing it forward is something that I thought was just kind of a remarkable, it made a remarkable imprint on me at the time. But when you look at other historic figures, in his own way, and I know he came to a tragic end, and I didn't name him on my list of people before, and you know who now I'm also going to add that, is Denny Hastert, the longest-serving Republican speaker. I used to joke, and it's a sad one, I cover people from announcement to indictment. This is one that during his reign in Congress, he really fashioned a speakership that kind of set the tone for a lot of what we see today, that the governing party is the majority of the majority. You don't compromise. And in a sense, under President Bush, I thought that Hastert thought of himself as a complementary power, not necessarily a competing or a rival one. So it was a very different managerial style that you saw evolve. And when I think of the tragic ends of all the figures I have covered, I think when you ask about Illinois history, I think the end of Denny Hastert is perhaps the most sad and tragic and stunning end of anyone who's come out of Illinois to become an important person in the Capitol on it. So I think when you look at the whole picture here, you have these rise and falls, but I think the sense of proud Illinoisans, when you look at the dynasties that have come here in some ways with our delegation, the Jacksons, the Lipinskis, Alderman Mel made sure that Blagojevich got in when George Collins got killed in a plane crash at Midway. Cardis Collins replaced him. So you do see a lot of that in our delegation as time has gone on, too. And one other thing about the power of Illinois, I just looked this up because I bet there are people here that know this. At our peak, we had 27 seats in the House, and we peaked in 1943. And when you talk about the influence in Illinois, it diminishes not only because we don't have, for the moment, except for Dick Durbin, who is a major figure within the party, both within the Illinois Democratic Party and the National Democratic Party. Now, we've gone from 27 at a high to now 18, and we might lose another seat after this census. When you think of how come we might not have as many people that are powerful, where we just don't have as many shots, chances of bringing people in and up that we used to, which I think is just kind of mechanically a result of the shrinking Illinois population.
And the expanding population elsewhere in the country. Right. But you have talked about a lot of Illinois politicians and the impact. It's really, I guess I hadn't remembered all of the names that you were talking about. I'm wondering, what makes the Illinois delegation? Is there something like how are they unique from the main delegation? Or well, that's a small delegation, but another Massachusetts delegation. Is there something about Chicago and Illinois politicians that separates them? Certainly, Chicago politics has a kind of a reputation around the country, I think, as brawling at the very least.
Oh, sure. Yeah, my favorite line came from George Will, that Chicago is the only city that associates the Feast of St. Valentine's with a massacre. And that pretty well describes the political atmosphere. Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Remember,
we'll be here all week. Thank you.
And remember, back in the day, I think Clarence remembers this, only here, this isn't central to your question, but only in Illinois and specifically in Chicago would it be a promotion, and as it was in the case of Roman Kuczynski, it was a promotion to step down as a member of Congress to become an alderman.
I remember the news conference. Were you there when he announced he was? because there was I remember some reporter, so a Chicago reporter said, Roman, why? Why do you want to leave Congress? And he said, Congress, that's only national. So any ward boss in Chicago knows where the real clout is, right?
And do you see a difference between what's upstate and what downstate? What are the differences of issues? How do the members work together or work separately?
Well, what struck me, and I'll give you a chance to talk about this because you've had more experience with the day-to-day over there, but I noticed, I'm trying to remember how long ago it was. I think it was like back in the 90s, I was covering the Democratic convention and, the Republican convention, when I went to a reception afterwards and just in talking with Illinois Republicans, how moderate and sensible my Illinois friends seem to be compared to a lot of the folks from more conservative states. And it was the beginning of the change of atmosphere that we have seen happen here in Washington since the early 90s, more polarized and all. But I remember later talking to Paul Simon, the senator, not the singer, and I just moved to Washington, and I said, it's rather striking to me how quiet and low-key people are here. And he said, well, Clarence, I'm doing my Al Franken imitation now. Well, Clarence, this is a small town, and you can hardly stretch your elbows out without poking somebody in the ribs. So everybody tries to be civil to each other. And that was about the time he was deciding to leave the Senate. Indeed, things got, not just because of him, but things have gotten less civil ever since. That was the rise of Newt Gingrich period there. Yeah. And that was a kind of Republican and Democratic politics that I did not see in Illinois. But Illinois seemed to be more concerned with folks back home. And I don't know how true that still is, but that was my impression early on.
Lynn, your thoughts?
So I came at the end, as I said, I came at the beginning of September '93. And it was a given that the delegation buried the axe when it came to any Illinois issue, especially soybeans. So that has deteriorated. It used to be a great tradition that when there was an Illinois lunch, and it was always hosted by the senior member from Illinois, it would either be Hastert, now it's Durbin, that all the members would come. They would maybe pass around member letters, they would chat about issues in common. And right now, Durbin hosts these lunches, and it really is just mainly the Democrats who come. Now, when Mark Kirk was the senator, he was a big believer in these joint events, and he would come. But right now the delegation is 11-7, 7 Republicans, and this sense of being part of a more cohesive Illinois entity just isn't there anymore. And I do date this unraveling to when Hastert was Speaker and Rahm Emanuel came to Washington, and he was immediately installed as the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, whose job it was to take back the House, which would have toppled Denny. So you had these combustible personalities, and it kind of was the beginning of an era that we're in now, where I just don't see people getting together. Now, the other thing that I think makes a big difference, I'm going to use the word earmark again. When you had earmarks, the lubricant that used to make this town work, a delegation kind of had to work together because there was always somebody, we always had somebody who was the power that you would go to. Rosti, Denny, whatever. A quick side pivot. Every reporter who covers local news wants to know what are the projects coming out of the committee, or what are this, what are that. It's like, what a waste of time. I just got to get the list of earmarks because nothing was done. In whatever you thought the process was, it's like, no, you got to get the list of what the real list is. But so I think some of this is when you have, you didn't need to have these transactions. And I think they were productive in that it forced people to discuss, I can't give you everything, I can give you this, what do you need? And I think it made more comity. On the other hand, I cannot, there is such, between the Obama years, now the Trump years, there is such polarization. It's hard to think of what Illinois issue would bring them together in a way that you could work. It wouldn't be a policy issue like the tax bill. It would probably be if there was some project that everybody thought was a good idea.
Like infrastructure repair?
Well, not in general. That would be it would be like to land another Fermilab or some big national entity, preferably near Chicago or in Chicago, which would make it easier. Because when you ask about the downstate, upstate, well, there is such a, and I am obviously, as a Chicago reporter, see things through that lens, but there is so much of the congressional power, even with the Republicans in control, does seem to be in the hands of Democrats, who are the most active right now in Illinois, even if they don't have power. I mean, the Republicans in the delegation just are not from, they have most of them are not from Chicago, except for Kinzinger and Roscom and Randy Hultgren. So the other four just are not really in the consciousness. But my point being, I bet if there was an issue, I don't know what it is right now, and some of you might be involved in them and can tell me later, that there was a need to rally around. Now, the other thing that's very unusual now is that we have a governor who is almost totally disengaged from Washington. Rahm Emanuel, who is a creature of Washington, worked in the White House, he knows where the money is. Okay, so a lot of times, as everyone in our viewers might know, you don't necessarily get a line appropriation for something. You figure out if you want more money for mass transit, you rework the formulas, whatever. So Rahm knows about that. And usually you have, in years past, we had a governor and a mayor working together, even of different parties. When George Ryan was the governor, he worked very well in Washington with Daley. They used to come, I remember one year there was a joint meeting. They came to meet with the delegation, and there is, the book, here's what we'd like, here are the programs, priorities. It's like, whoa, it's been a while since we have seen that. So Rauner has been in Washington once, and it was shortly after he was elected and before he was inaugurated. And he has gone out of his way, and I've written about it, as have others, not to comment about any federal issue pending. So that is a loss in the way of another player and another voice that we're used to hearing from Illinois.
Well, that actually, I was going to ask you guys, who should we be watching? Who's the next Obama, so to speak?
Rising powers,
yes,
or rising.
Yeah, I mean, is it Garcia? Is he the next person to watch? Who do you see as the future of Illinois politics?
That's a good question.
I have two names to throw out, a
Okay.
Democrat and a Republican. I think the two people who are the most ambitious and have statewide potential to run on the Republican side is Adam Kinzinger, and on the Democratic side is Sherry Bustos.
Oh,
Sherry Bustos.
Oh, yeah.
from Rockford?
She's from northwestern Illinois. She is in Democratic leadership now. Adam Kinzinger, military. Both have different backgrounds, but they have, I think, the kind of ability to get to be known around the state. Kinzinger is one of the rare Republicans who I see on CNN and MSNBC and Fox, and it's not a lot of, some Democrats won't do Fox, some Republicans won't do MS. So Kinzinger is, I think, somebody who, if we were making a list of who from the delegation might make a move at some point, I'd put those two on the list.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Clarence, any thoughts on who are the up-and-comers at the local or Washington level?
That's a very good question. I've been so depressed lately over the lack of leadership, and particularly on
I'm going to try to pull you out of it.
Well, particularly on the Democratic side, because they just have lapsed too long in developing young talent, and they're very well aware of it now because you can see the vacuum out there. Republicans have just done a much better job over the last 20 years or so of spotting young talent, finding ways to use them and move them up. into leadership positions. But as far as rising stars in Illinois right now, I have not seen them, but I like Lynn's picks there. I just hope they don't get squashed by the powers that be before they rise up and blossom.
Well, it could be. You know, another name of people to watch is Representative Robin Kelly, who took the 2nd District seat after Jesse Jackson stepped down. But sometimes it takes time. I don't know what the future holds for Darren LaHood. He's still in his first term. He follows, when we talk about great Illinoisans, let me mention Ray LaHood. Forgive me for not bringing up his name until now, who I know Clarence knows well.
Everybody knows Ray.
Well, and he is about as Illinois as it gets in Washington. You know, he is an example of a politician who, like Durbin, you're fluent in Illinois and you could talk national or globally, but you always have one foot back home. And you know, look at the Ray LaHood career. You know, top staffer for Bob Michael, takes his seat, rises in the House, retires, goes to be the transportation secretary under Barack Obama, because when you talk about moderate Republicans, that's the mold of Ray LaHood. He forged a relationship with Rahm Emanuel, Democrat, Republican. They got things done. I think they also liked each other. And that helps a lot in a political climate. When you have differences and you don't like each other, which is kind of how we are now, it's a little harder. And he became a member of the Obama cabinet. And I think to this day, he is one of the leaders in some of these, and he had when he was in office and out of office, of the movements for civility and bipartisanship, which for the moment I think has a way to go, given the current climate.
Yeah, a Ray LaHood today on the scene would be excoriated as a rhino, et cetera, but he was marvelous at it, and it wasn't what phony or contrived at all. It was just very natural. He got along with everybody, and he was the kind of moderation I was referring to earlier when I said the Illinois Republicans just seem so much more sensible than most of the rest of the states.
So neither of the state's 2 senators came up.
Well, I mentioned Durbin, but now and talking about Illinois history, we should discuss the historic election in 1992 in the last year of the woman of Carol Moseley Braun, who I first met when she was a state representative in Springfield, and you probably met her, that time too?
I met her when she was part of the Harold Washington ticket. Remember that? The
Dream Team.
Dream Team ticket, yeah. That was back in the 80s there.
When she was running for Recorder of Deeds.
I think that was it, yeah.
That was it, yeah. So I met her in Springfield.
Jobs that don't belong on the ballot at all.
County Recorder of Deeds, and then she ran after the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings. She decided to run, and it was historic. First female senator from Illinois, and the first African-American female in the United States Senate. So
and the first loss for Alan Dixon in his career.
But when you asked us about senators, so until then, I mean, Alan Dixon was another big figure back home, who was able to juggle that local and national, and everyone knows, and all our viewers, if you don't know it, when you say L, it's L the pal.
That's right.
Because he got along. And he had a legacy of staffers that have worked on the Hill for years. Some of them might still be around. I mean, he had he ran the Base Closure Commission, the Base Realignment Commission after that. So we have now, when we talk about up-and-comers, the reason I didn't mention freshman Senator Tammy Duckworth is that she's already up and come. It's not a matter of waiting. I met her in 2005. Durbin invited soldiers who were from Illinois to be his guests, 2 of them at the State of the Union. And she was wounded, recovering from her wounds at Walter Reed. Durbin did a little press availability beforehand. They were going to sit in his box, and I met her. And I thought, oh my God, to even come outside with the kind of wound she had and was covering. And we talked about the war in Iraq, and she had views, and we talked about them. And even though she suffered terribly in that war, she understood what war meant and why she did it, even if I got the sense back in that day in 2005, she didn't necessarily agree with it, which, by the way, fast forward, I just did a story on how she wants Trump to be made more aware and to talk more about the cost of war because she knows what it is. But anyway, so when we talk about people who, she has a relatively quick rise in the scheme of things because after, 2 terms in the House, so she ran for the House in 2006 and lost, went to run the Illinois State Department of Veteran Affairs, and President Obama tapped her to be an executive in the VA, and then she ran for the House and then the Senate, so that is a pretty fast rise.
But could you see, do you think, so she's already rising.
Yeah.
But do you see her as like a future player?
Yes,
as you
absolutely.
get?
Absolutely, because she is starting a career now that I think has just no limit in a sense, depending on what she wants to do. Potential leadership. If you're asking, does she have potential leadership in her? Yeah, absolutely.
And do you see Senator Durbin, who is a leader in the Senate for the Democrats, will he maintain that? If you had to predict his future plans, what's he planning to do?
Well, a good question. I've tried to get out of the prediction habit ever since last November's election. Some of you may recall that. But I think the thing about Dick Durbin, I hope he doesn't fall into the kind of position that Bob Michel fell into, because Michel, throughout his long career as a Republican leader, was never in the majority. And so it was good that he had the kind of personality that was a good deal maker and got along with folks, because he was able to get things done, even with the party being in the minority for a long time. With Durbin, I detect a similar kind of a thing, because the Democrats don't have the clout.
Yeah.
What clout in this town right now, and how much? But things can change depending on what the next couple of elections do, and he'll be well positioned anyway, and particularly on international affairs. He's really excellent. But I think he's been a good senator for Illinois.
Yeah.
Well, here's what's interesting about Durbin. He is one of the few lawmakers who I have covered who could actually create an issue, who sees something out there and is able to articulate it and bring it forth. What do I mean? Dick Durbin understood and invented the Dreamer movement. When he came across a young lady in Illinois who we didn't have the term dreamer, he invented it. He was part of in his era, and he saw, oh my God, he learned the story of this one young lady, realized there are so many people around Illinois alone who have been brought here illegally through no fault of their own, and now we got to, what is their situation? What is to be done? Because it is, no matter where you stand on the issue, it is an issue that needs to be addressed. Dick Durbin, when he was in the House, started the crusade that led to the banning of smoking on airlines. He identified that as an issue. Dick Durbin was one of the leaders in food safety. The first time I heard of Elizabeth Warren is when Dick Durbin mentioned her. She was a Harvard Law professor and wrote some monograph or paper on the need for some kind of consumer finance commission. It was Dick Durbin who turned that monograph into a bill calling for the creation of what is now in the news today, the Consumer Finance Board. Okay, it's Dick Durbin that took on the whole issue of student loan debt and predatory practices. So out of all the people I cover, I try sometimes to say, what is this person identified with? And it is for some people hard. Everybody says, well, I want tax equity, fine, or I want to have more business, or those are generalities. But when you think of causes, this is where Durbin is unique among almost everyone I have covered, is that he's had that ability to do that.
True.
Well, I have to say, again, as a Wisconsin native, I have a serious inferiority complex now because listening to these stories, it certainly is fun to think about all the things that Illinois lawmakers have done for the state or the country. And we could not have had better tour guides to take us on that trip down memory lane and a little into the future. So thank both of you.
Well, thank
Thanks
you.
so
You're
much.
too kind. Thank you.